Welcome to StorySeeker, exploring the world, one story at a time. Today, let's listen to the classic tale The Little Prince, the journey of a boy in search of friendship and the meaning of life. When I was 6 years old, I saw a striking image in a book about the jungle. It showed a boa constrictor swallowing a wild animal whole. I was fascinated not by the violence, but by the mystery. I couldn't stop thinking about what might be happening inside the snake. So I picked up a crayon and drew my own version. I called it Drawing Number 1. It looked like a simple brown hat. At least, that's what the grown-ups said when I showed it to them. A hat? That's nice, they said, without a second glance. But it wasn't a hat. It was a drawing of a boa constrictor digesting an elephant. Since they didn't understand, I made another drawing this time, showing the inside of the snake, with the elephant clearly curled up in its belly. I called it Drawing Number 2. Still, they didn't get it. They told me I should forget about drawing and focus on real things: math, history, spelling, geography. And so, at the age of 6, I gave up my dream of becoming an artist. I learned that grown-ups can't see things clearly on their own. They always need explanations. As I grew older, I became a pilot. I met all kinds of people, visited faraway places, and flew above oceans and deserts. But the more adults I met, the more I realized they hadn't changed. They still couldn't see the elephant inside the snake. They still only saw the hat. So, whenever I met someone who seemed just a little different, just a little curious, I would show them my Drawing Number 1. If they said, "That's a hat," I knew not to waste my time. But if they paused, really looked and said, "That's a boa constrictor, isn't it?" then I knew I had found someone special, someone who could see. And that is how I came to be alone in the world, flying planes above deserts, oceans, and stars, hoping one day I might find a kindred soul. It was 6 years after I had given up drawing, 6 years of flying planes and talking only to grown-ups who never really listened. Then, one day, over the vast silence of the Sahara Desert, my engine failed. There was no one for miles, no cities, no roads, just sand and sky. I had enough drinking water for about 8 days, so I set to work right away, trying to fix the engine, alone, under the baking sun. On the second morning, as the golden light crept across the dunes, I was woken not by the sound of wind or sand, but by a quiet voice. "If you please, draw me a sheep." I sat up, blinking, and there he was, a boy, small, maybe 7 or 8 years old, hair like golden wheat, a scarf around his neck, fluttering gently in the breeze, eyes as calm as the sky. He looked at me like he had every right to be there, as if appearing in the middle of the desert was perfectly normal. I stared at him, too stunned to speak. He repeated politely, "Please, draw me a sheep." When something impossible happens, you don't argue, you simply obey. So I reached into my bag, pulled out paper and pen, and tried to draw him a sheep. The first drawing I knew right away was no good. He frowned. "No, that sheep looks sick." I tried again, too old. A third time, too stubborn. "I want a sheep that will live a long time." I was starting to lose patience. I had work to do. My engine wasn't going to fix itself. So I drew a simple box, a plain rectangle with a few holes, and told him, "This is a box. Your sheep is inside." To my surprise, his face lit up. "That's perfect. Just the way I wanted." He clapped his hands like a child on Christmas morning, as if I'd just given him the stars. And that's how I met the little prince. He never told me where he came from. Not at first. He asked questions, many of them, but never answered mine. He was more interested in the sheep. Would it eat bushes? Would it need a leash? Would it eat flowers? He didn't care about my plane or how I ended up in the desert. To him, the important things were invisible. That night, as I lay beside the wreck of my plane, I stared at the stars and wondered what kind of world he came from. A boy who saw sheep inside boxes, who appeared from nowhere and made the desert feel full of wonder. I didn't know it then, but the little prince had traveled far, from another planet, small and barely bigger than a house, and he had a story to tell. But first, he had to learn to trust me, and I had to learn how to see again, not with my eyes, but with my heart. Over the next few days, as I worked to fix my plane, the little prince opened up slowly. He spoke in pieces, as children do, not with timelines, but with feelings. And one night, as the stars shimmered above the desert, he told me about his planet. It was small, so small, he could watch sunsets by simply shifting his chair a few steps. One time, he watched 44 sunsets in a row. When you're sad, he said, sunsets are wonderful. I asked, were you that sad, little prince? But he didn't answer. Instead, he told me about a flower. She had appeared one morning, just as the sun rose, a delicate thing, unlike anything he had seen before. She took her time unfurling her petals. She was dramatic, beautiful, but proud. A rose. She knew she was lovely. She talked a lot. She asked for attention. She asked for protection from wind, from cold, from caterpillars. She lied, sometimes. She made the little prince feel unsure. But still, he loved her. He watered her. He put a glass globe over her at night. He built a screen to shield her from the breeze. He did all he could, and yet she made him feel small. She made him question himself. She confused me, he said softly. I didn't understand love then. I ran away. That's why he left his planet. Not because he stopped loving her, but because he didn't know how to stay. I should have looked past her words, he whispered. I should have listened to what she meant, not what she said. He stared up at the stars then, and for the first time, I saw a shadow pass through his bright eyes. Regret. Sometimes, we don't know we've loved deeply until we walk away, and by then, it's already too late. He was quiet after that. I didn't press. In the desert, the nights are wide and full of silence, but sitting beside him, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something vast, not sand, not sky, but memory, something sacred. The rose had stayed behind on his little planet, under her glass dome, waiting, or maybe not, but in his heart, she was still there. Every thorn, every petal, every word he didn't understand, still blooming. After leaving his flower and his tiny home behind, the little prince set out to explore the universe. He visited planets, each barely larger than his own, each occupied by a single, peculiar grown-up. The first planet was ruled by a king. He wore a grand robe and sat on a throne, though there was no one to rule. "Ah, a subject," the king exclaimed as soon as he saw the little prince. "I'm not a subject," said the boy, confused. "Nevertheless," said the king, waving a gloved hand, "I order you to sit." The little prince sat, unsure of what else to do. The king spoke as if his words shaped the stars. He gave commands not because they were needed, but because he loved the sound of authority. "I command the sun to set," he declared proudly, "but it won't set for hours. Then I'll command it when it's ready. One must only give reasonable orders." The little prince found it odd. The king didn't seek to understand. He only wished to be obeyed. So the boy asked, "May I leave now?" "I command you to leave," said the king quickly, at precisely the right moment. And so, with a polite bow, the little prince departed. On the second planet, he met a vain man, dressed smartly with a feathered hat. He stood in the center of the planet like it was a stage. "Ah, an admirer," he cried, beaming. "Good morning," said the little prince. "You have a funny hat." "It's to greet applause," said the man. "Clap your hands, please." The little prince clapped, and the man lifted his hat in a grand gesture. "Do you really admire me?" the man asked. "What does that mean?" the boy asked. "It means you think I'm the most handsome, the richest, and the smartest man on this planet. But you're the only one on this planet." "Still," said the man, "admiration is important." The boy grew tired of the vanity and moved on. On the third planet, he found a drunkard. He sat surrounded by empty bottles and full ones, eyes dull, face red. "What are you doing?" the little prince asked gently. "Drinking," said the drunkard. "Why?" "To forget." "Forget what?" "To forget that I'm ashamed." "Ashamed of what?" "Of drinking," the man mumbled. The little prince stood in silence. He didn't know what to say. So he left. 3 planets, 3 grown-ups, a king who needed power, a man who needed praise, a drunkard lost in shame. The little prince began to understand something. Grown-ups weren't always wise. They didn't always make sense. And sometimes they lived in circles too small to escape. He continued his journey, planet by planet, looking not for answers, but for someone who could listen. The little prince's journey brought him to another strange world, a planet so small, yet occupied by a man who seemed very, very busy. He was the businessman, seated behind a cluttered desk. The man didn't even look up when the little prince arrived. 3 and 2 make 5, 5 and 7 make 12, 12 and 3 make 15, he muttered, scribbling numbers into a massive ledger. "Good morning," said the little prince politely. What? I'm busy," the man replied, still writing. "What are you counting?" the boy asked. "Stars," said the businessman. "I own them." "You own the stars?" the prince blinked. "Yes, I've counted them all and written them down. That proves ownership." "What do you do with them?" "Nothing. I own them. That's enough." The little prince thought this was very strange. To him, stars were for looking at, wondering about, making wishes upon, not owning. "It's like the flower I water or the volcanoes I clean. They need me, but the stars don't need you." The businessman didn't hear him. He was too busy counting. So the little prince left, a little sad, a little wiser. On the next planet, he found something different. A man lighting a street lamp. Every minute, the lamplighter would light the lamp, then a moment later, extinguish it. Light, dark, light, dark. "Why are you doing that?" the little prince asked. "Orders," said the lamplighter. "I was told to light the lamp at sunset and put it out at sunrise, but your planet spins so fast now, there's a sunset every minute." "I know," the man sighed, wiping his brow. "I have no time to rest." The little prince watched the man work, admiring his devotion. Of all the grown-ups he'd met, this one seemed the least selfish. He wasn't counting stars or demanding praise. He simply followed his duty, even when it made no sense. "If I had more time here," the little prince said softly, "I would be your friend." But the planet turned too quickly, and the boy had to move on. In the sky between planets, the little prince thought about time. about how some people are always busy, too busy to look up, to ask questions, to see what truly matters. He thought about the lamplighter and how even in a senseless task, there was a kind of beauty. Sometimes, what makes something meaningful isn't what you do, it's how gently you do it. The next planet the little prince visited was larger than the others. On it sat a man surrounded by thick books, maps, and papers that seemed to cover the ground like fallen leaves. He was the geographer. "What do you do?" the little prince asked. "I'm a scholar," said the geographer, peering over his glasses. "I record the locations of mountains, rivers, seas, cities. Do you travel and see them for yourself?" "Certainly not," the man huffed. "I'm too important for that. I rely on explorers. But what if an explorer lies? Then we make a note of it. But we never check ourselves." The little prince found this strange. He thought of his flower so delicate, so proud. "Do you record flowers?" he asked. "Absolutely not," said the geographer. "Flowers are ephemeral. They disappear. We only record what is permanent." The word ephemeral lingered in the boy's mind. Fleeting, temporary. Was his rose too fragile to be remembered? It stung, even though she had thorns, even though she had been difficult. He didn't want her to vanish without a trace. Then the geographer leaned forward. "Tell me about your planet. What's it like?" But the little prince had already made up his mind. "I want to go somewhere real," he said. "Somewhere with people and rivers and mountains and flowers." "Try Earth," said the geographer. "It has a good reputation." So the little prince left, floating quietly through space. He passed moons and dust and silence until at last Earth appeared. A planet of oceans and deserts, cities and forests. A world filled with people but also loneliness. The first thing he met was not a city or a person, but a snake. It coiled in the sand, its eyes ancient and still. "Good evening," said the little prince. "Good evening," said the snake. "What planet is this?" the boy asked. "Earth," replied the snake. "In Africa." The snake spoke in riddles, his voice soft like wind on stone. "You are a strange creature," said the little prince. "So are you," the snake replied. "So fragile, on a world so wide." "Are you powerful?" the prince asked. "I can send you back to where you came from," the snake whispered, with a single touch. The boy didn't understand. Not yet, but he thanked the snake and moved on. He was searching for people, for someone to talk to, but the desert stretched endlessly, empty, silent. It was only the beginning of his time on Earth, but already he could feel it was a place full of questions, and maybe, just maybe, some answers. The desert stretched endlessly around the little prince. Sand, sky, silence. He had arrived on Earth, a planet said to be full of people, but so far, he had found no one, only a golden snake with quiet eyes. So he walked. The sun rose, the wind whispered across the dunes. He wandered, small and alone beneath a sky, too wide to hold. After a long time, he came upon a single flower no taller than his ankle, trembling slightly in the dry breeze. "Good morning," he said gently. "Good morning," the flower replied. "Where are the people?" the little prince asked. "People?" The flower sounded puzzled. "I saw a few years ago. They came and went. The wind carries them like seeds," and that was all she knew. The little prince thanked her and kept walking. Later, he climbed a high mountain. On his planet, the volcanoes were so small he could sweep them out with a rake. But here, the mountains touched the clouds. He stood on a peak and looked out, hoping to see someone, a city, a spark of life, but he saw only rocks, dust, and distant light. "Hello?" he called. "Hello, hello, hello," the echo answered. "Who are you?" he asked. "Who are you? Who are you? Who are you?" "Be my friend," the little prince said. "Be my friend, be my friend." He waited. No one came. The echo repeated his words, but offered nothing new. It did not ask questions. It did not feel. It only mirrored. The little prince sat down on a stone, drawing lines in the dust with one small finger. On his own planet, he had a flower that spoke too much. Here, the earth had voices that said nothing. He missed his rose, her confusing words, her fragile pride, the way she asked for protection but never said please. "I was too young to understand her," he whispered. And for the first time, a soft ache stirred inside him. Not sadness, not quite, but something close. The kind of feeling that grows in quiet places. The stars began to appear, one by one, and the air grew cooler. The little prince wrapped his scarf tighter and looked up. So many stars, so many stories, and yet, in that moment, he had never felt more alone. The little prince wandered the desert for what felt like days. The silence was constant, not heavy, but deep, a kind of silence that made you aware of every step, every breath, every thought. Then, among the sand and stones, he saw something unexpected, a flower, not grand, not radiant, just alive. A single stem rising from dry soil, a few petals trembling in the breeze. The little prince knelt beside her. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," the flower replied. She wasn't like his rose. She was plain, quiet. She didn't ask for admiration. She didn't complain. "Where are the people?" he asked. The flower looked around, as if noticing the emptiness for the first time. "People," she said softly. "I believe they passed by, years ago, maybe 6 or 7 of them. I don't know where they went. The wind carries them, I think." The little prince nodded. On his planet, his rose had always spoken so much. This flower said so little, but even so, she was alive, and in a place as vast and lonely as the desert. That was something. He didn't ask more. He didn't stay long. He simply smiled, whispered a thank you, and moved on. But as he walked, a thought bloomed quietly inside him, like the desert flower itself. Even in the driest places, something beautiful might still grow. After speaking with the quiet flower, the little prince wandered farther, his footsteps sinking gently into the sand. He longed to hear a voice that wasn't his own, or the wind, or the echo of silence. Something real, something human. In the distance, he saw a tall mountain. On his planet, the tallest things were volcanoes, no higher than his knees. But this was grand, towering, sharp against the sky. If I climb it, he thought, maybe I'll see the whole earth. Maybe I'll find people. Maybe I'll hear a voice that answers. So he climbed. The stones were hot beneath his feet, the sun steady above his head. Step by step, he ascended quiet, determined, hopeful. When he reached the top, he stood at the edge and looked out. But there were no cities, no people, no smoke from chimneys, just more rock, more sand, more sky. He cupped his hands and called out, "Hello." The mountains answered, "Hello, hello, hello." "Who are you?" He tried again. "Who are you? Who are you? Please, be my friend. Be my friend, be my friend." The wind carried his own words back to him, like a voice without soul. He sat down on a stone, legs dangling, eyes thoughtful. "This planet is strange," he murmured. "It echoes, but it doesn't speak." He missed his flower, missed her confusing questions and sudden moods. She may have been difficult, but at least she was real. The echo could not argue, could not laugh, could not forgive. It could only return what was given, nothing more. The little prince drew circles in the dust with one finger. "Grown-ups," he whispered. "They have such big voices, and still, they hear so little." That night, he lay on the mountain slope and watched the stars. They blinked softly, as if they were breathing, and in that vast, quiet moment, he realized something. Sometimes, the loudest thing in the world is the sound of your own voice, unanswered. Places, something beautiful might still grow. The little prince had wandered far and wide, but he had yet to find what he was truly looking for, someone who would understand. Then one day, he came upon a golden field. A soft wind moved through the tall grass, and in the middle of it sat a fox. The fox saw him and blinked slowly. "Good morning," said the little prince. "Good morning," said the fox. "Will you play with me?" the prince asked. "I'm so lonely, I cannot play with you," the fox replied. "I'm not tamed." "Tamed?" the boy echoed. "What does that mean?" "It means to build ties," the fox said gently, "to become special to one another." The little prince sat down. "To me, you are just a little boy, like 100,000 others, and to you, I am just a fox, like 100,000 others. But if you tame me, we will need each other." The idea was beautiful and frightening. "How do I tame you?" the little prince asked. "You must be very patient," the fox said. "Sit a little closer each day. Don't speak much. Just be there." So that's what they did. Each day, the little prince returned to the field. He said little, but he came. He showed up. He was present, and slowly, the fox began to wait for him. The golden wheat fields, once ordinary, now reminded the fox of the boy's hair. The wind, once meaningless, now carried the rhythm of something gentle and true. And then, the day came to say goodbye. The little prince's heart was heavy. "I shouldn't have tamed you," he whispered. "Yes, you should have," the fox said, "because now you understand." He looked the boy in the eyes and said the secret, the one he had been waiting to share. One sees clearly only with the heart. What is essential is invisible to the eye. The little prince said it back, softly, as if engraving it in his soul. What is essential is invisible to the eye. "You are responsible for what you have tamed," said the fox. "Forever." The boy nodded. He thought of his flower, his proud, stubborn, precious rose, the one he left behind, the one he didn't understand, until now. As he walked away, the fox didn't call out or follow. But in his silence, there was something louder than words. And in the boy's heart, something had changed forever. The little prince continued his journey, crossing landscapes both empty and alive. Earth was vast, full of people, but strangely, most of them seemed to be running. One day, he came across a railway switchman. He stood beside long tracks of steel, guiding trains that roared past like storms. "What are they rushing toward?" asked the little prince. "No one really knows," the switchman replied. "They're always in a hurry, going from place to place. Some are going north, some south. They change trains, but not their lives. Do they like where they're going? Not really. Children are the only ones who look out the windows." The little prince thought about that. On his tiny planet, there were no trains. But here, people moved so fast, they forgot to look. Soon after, he met a salesman. "I sell thirst-quenching pills," the man announced proudly. "Take one a week, and you'll never need to drink again." "Why would I not want to drink?" the little prince asked. "Think of the time you'll save." The boy blinked. "And what would I do with that time?" "Whatever you like." The little prince shook his head gently. "If I had 53 minutes to spare," he said, "I'd walk slowly toward a well." That night, the little prince and the pilot walked together under the stars. The pilot had been trying to fix his plane for days, and now his water supply was nearly gone. He was tired, frustrated, but the little prince looked up and said softly, "Water may also be good for the heart." And so they searched. They walked in silence, side by side, not rushed, not afraid, and just before dawn, they found a well. It was old, like something out of a storybook, hidden beneath the sand. Together, they drew water. It tasted cool, clear, and alive. More than water, it felt like a gift. The pilot looked at the little prince and saw how radiant he looked, his golden hair, his calm eyes, the light of a distant love still glowing within him. "It's not just the well," the boy said. "It's the walk, the waiting, the stars. It's everything that came before that makes it sweet." The pilot nodded. He was beginning to understand. The pilot fixed his plane the next day. With help from the little prince's quiet presence, his heart had settled enough to see the engine clearly. The bolts fit, the pieces turned, hope hummed under the metal. But that same morning, the little prince stood a little farther away than usual. He looked thoughtful. Still, his golden hair caught the light like wheat at the end of summer. "I'm going back home today," he said softly. The pilot froze. "To your planet?" The boy nodded. "It's been a year. My rose is waiting." There was silence between them, heavy but gentle. The little prince explained that the way back wasn't a journey in the usual sense. He would need help. From the snake, the one he'd met on his first night in the desert. "It will look like I'm dying," he said. "But don't be sad. It's just my body. It's too heavy to take with me." The pilot's heart twisted. "You'll understand," the boy whispered. "You'll look at the stars and remember me." He smiled. "When you look up, they'll all be laughing, because I'll be laughing on one of them. And when you hear laughter in the sky, you'll know it's me." That evening, they walked together one last time. The desert was silent, as always, but the silence now felt different, sacred. The little prince paused, then took a single step forward. There was a flash in the sand, a quiet sound, and then nothing. The pilot never found his body. He stood in the empty desert, heart full and broken all at once. Later, he flew away, his plane repaired, his water full, his soul changed. Years have passed, and still, sometimes at night, he looks up at the stars and he hears laughter. He smiles softly because somewhere on a tiny planet just beyond our eyes, a rose still blooms, and a little prince is watching the sunsets. What is essential is invisible to the eye, but if you listen, truly listen, you might just hear a star laughing. Some stories don't end. They linger like a whisper in the dark, or a star that keeps blinking long after you've stopped looking. The little prince is gone, but maybe, not really. Maybe he's still out there on a tiny planet with 3 volcanoes and 1 stubborn rose. Maybe he's right above you now, laughing on a star that only your heart can hear. And maybe, just maybe, you too have tamed something. Something small, something important, something invisible, but unforgettable. So next time the night feels too quiet, look up, and if a star seems to laugh, you'll know he's still there, watching sunsets, waiting for someone who can see with the heart. Thank you for strolling through today's stories with StorySeeker. If you also love classic literature, fairy tales, and endless adventures, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any journey. See you in the next story. Wishing you all the best.